Everybody, thank you for waiting. Some logistic issue, but we're here. So this is one of the first webinars that we are redoing with the Cloud Security Alliance. As a Cloud Security Alliance, we are a non-for-profit organization that operates to expand the security knowledge of everybody in the cloud. We do conference, webinar, meetups, and so on. And this meetup today is bringing you Dimitri Yates to have an interesting conversation with him and us, and having a very interesting background on some of the cloud transformation. And I hope this is informative for everybody. So the talk, I'm going to introduce the talk, and then Dimitri is going to walk you through the cloud security transformation challenges, and then we're going to have a small panel and Q&A. Please invite everybody to go to the Cloud Security Alliance UK chapter, that is www.cloudsecurityalliance.org.uk. We have a number of blog posts, research paper, and as I said, we do events. So we participate in a number of events, and we have our own annual gateway meeting, also known as AGM. It has a completely separate page. I'm going to share it at the end. So, who is the Cloud Security Alliance? Lee, Paul, Louis, Chris, Ben, Ranley, Dimitris, Vladimir. This is the board, but we are a much wider organization. These are the leader that leads the UK chapter, but we're a much wider organization with 300 members strong at this point in time, and 1,200 across the UK and Ireland. So, I'm going to stop talking, despite the fact that I'm Italian and I love to talk, and I'm going to give the presenter right to Dimitri. Dimitri, presenter is yours.
And yes, thank you for taking your time out in this sort of difficult time to join us here today. I just really wanted to basically talk everyone through something which we have been discussing among the board members and the rest of the CSA here, UK chapter, and it's really about how we can add practical value, giving something to the audience here today that actually is not just death by PowerPoint, but actually something that's really practical and useful. So what I wanted to talk to everyone about today is some learnings which I personally have had and got working through some very, very large cloud transformations across various industry sectors and very, very large companies. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. A little bit about me. Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I've been in technology for a long time, well over 2 decades. I'm a self-confessed sort of technophile and lover of all things technology. I have been involved in very large cloud transformations for the best just over a decade now, and so I've seen a lot of things, a lot of different transformations, some successful, some not so much. And really, I think what I wanted to talk about today was the reasons, as I saw it, for certainly the more successful transformations and why they were more successful than others. Slight disclaimer, of course, everything I speak about today is obviously from the trenches and sort of real life experiences. However, I have tried to keep it as generic as possible, so I'm not referring to any particular client or organization, but rather more about the learnings. Right, so I think we all are aware of the value in terms of why people do digital transformations. And I think it's fair to say when we mention or use the words digital transformations, we are using or talking about moving into the cloud, be that a completely private public model or a hybrid of public, private, on-prem, and a combination of cloud vendors. So obviously, when we talk about cloud, sort of there's a synergy with that and digital transformation. Also, I don't want to talk too much here about the widely accepted values of cloud computing, such as agility, flexibility, scale, all of those things. I think it is almost agreed universally that those things are there. So I think don't want to go too much into that. And this is not a technical talk. We can certainly have a technical conversation should we wish to have one in the future. But this is more around the sort of, if you like, the people side of things. And in my arguably perhaps the real core issue and the real problem I have found certainly when people move into cloud. So with that, just moving on to the next slide here. Bear with me a second. The joys of working from home. And yes, so I think we've all been involved and seen cloud transformations and migrations to the cloud have perhaps taken a bit longer than they should have, cost quite a bit more than they should have, and I think more importantly, did not deliver the vision or the value, or should we say the expectations at the start of them for whatever reason. And I think for me, one thing I have noticed is a lot of the challenges that people have faced or organizations have faced when it comes to successful migration haven't been necessarily technical. Technical issues can be solved. I think the biggest challenges, as I mentioned at the top when I opened up this conversation, was the more successful migrations I've been involved in, certainly taken into account these three key factors. And these are the three factors I want to talk to you about today. So we can all see, so one of the biggest ones is obviously as organizations go into the cloud, a lot of organizations do not consider the impact of that change, that transformation to the political climate and the organizational structure. A second problem or challenge or consideration, which a lot of my clients certainly successful ones took into account, was preparing for the necessary changes to the organization's processes, its culture, the ways of working. And finally, there's also the requirement, which may sound obvious, but it's the way you plan for it, is the upskilling, training, and the employee communication. So things like setting up a cloud center of excellence and things like that. So I want to talk very, very briefly about each one of these in turn. And these are non-technical issues which very often overlooked by senior management because they're seen as a cloud transformation, seen as a purely a technical domain. So when we use digital transformation or cloud migration, people think about it as a technical issue. But certainly there's a very, very non-technical side to the cloud migration coin, and that's what we're going to talk about. So clear and decisive leadership. So one of the things I have found and seen in successful migrations, and certainly in the unsuccessful ones, is clear and decisive leadership. What does that mean? So the actual decision makers, the leadership of the company needs to make it very clear throughout the entire company that this is the direction of travel. And direction of travel means that everything is going to be cloud first as a first or default position. Obviously, things can change. Obviously, there are challenges, but that message needs to be clear that cloud is a direction of travel, and that's the way it's going to be. That message should come from the very top. It must be very clear. It must be emphatic. And basically, I think another thing which organizations sometimes fail to do is to make changes and plans that would be required in order for that message to be enacted, if you like. So I'll give an example of what we mean by the changes. So if we were to look at procurement as a simple example, so procurement is a division which in traditional IT environments, and not just traditional IT environments, but I would say companies as a whole, historically, we all have and worked with procurement departments. Procurement departments exist for a very good reason. They generally have very good relationships with vendors, suppliers, clients, etc. And this is one particular area. There's this, depending on the size of the company, this can be quite a large or set of people or division, or maybe not so much so. But if we were to take any average size company, you certainly have at least a handful of people working in procurement. And as and when a company moves into the cloud, the question becomes is how relevant is procurement? So we all know that if you want to provision something in the cloud, it's literally a matter of clicking a button and you essentially get a bill at the end of the month. So there's no sort of long-winded processes of ordering, contract negotiation, etc., etc. So how does this actually impact a company moving into the cloud? And one of the things that people worry about quite naturally, and this is where the sort of non-technical aspect is, people do worry and worry about their jobs. Quite basically, quite frankly, they worry about their jobs. So if we're going back to my example of procurement, I think the communication aspect then becomes very relevant. So again, if I can go back to my three key factors, one of which I mentioned was clear message from leadership. And here, clear leadership means hard decisions need to be made. Made about what? So take the procurement division as the example again. Obviously, people will be wondering, well, am I actually required or needed in this company going forward? Will I have a job, by the time this cloud migration completes? And this is where hard decisions need to be made. Again, clear leadership. So the leadership of the successful companies would have or sometimes make plans. They adjust the size or the number of employees, procurement just being an example, and making hard decisions of either moving people on or moving them to another department. And essentially at the end of that, what they do is they make it very clear to the people that they are going to keep on, that they will be kept on, that they will be trained, and they will be upskilled as necessary. But here's another thing. So again, if you look at the example of procurement, these people generally tend to have very good relationships, have built relationships over the years with finance. They have built relationships with various departments within an organization. And these relationships and skills actually come in very, very useful in the cloud. So I'll give an example. So if you migrate into, a cloud vendor, AWS, Azure, whichever, and you essentially have built all your infrastructure, your architecture, you have an understanding or instances you want to run, etc., etc. That's great. And now every month you literally have a bill. So assuming that you've done your tags or some other identifying what department or division within an organization is using what cloud resources, that relationship that's already there with procurement and the rest of the organization actually help in that they will actually be able to communicate with the right person in department X or department Y and say, look, here's your bill for the previous month. Is it too big? Is it too large? Someone might want to, I don't know, adjust that. maybe increase it, reduce it. And those relationships absolutely come in very, very handy indeed. So again, even though you are transitioning or migrating to the cloud, if you've actually communicated to procurement, these people know that their jobs are valid and they're secure, they actually start to enjoy their job, and they actually add a lot of value to that entire migration process, if you like. Another example of the challenge, a human challenge, when it comes to migrating into the cloud is, I certainly recall many discussions and conversations with technical people. So an example of that is the messages was sort of clear that some cloud instances were going to be used, and I've had conversations as an architect with other architects, certainly IT, along the lines of, okay, here's what we need to migrate, here's how we can do it, let's go ahead and do it. And you get a lot of roadblocks. So, for example, I have heard conversations and had interesting conversations along the lines of, oh, we can do better resilience and better backup on-premise, or things like Cloud Foundry. Those of us who don't know what Cloud Foundry is, I'm sure most of us do, but Cloud Foundry, so we have an on-premise cloud-like instance. It's much better, it's much more scalable, it's much more agile. All those arguments come in. And you have these conversations, and essentially people either slow the whole process down or find a ton of different arguments to stop or prevent things happening. You end up having meetings about meetings. You end up having a lot of challenges and very robust conversations about why this won't work and that won't work, etc., etc. And essentially, this goes back to the idea that generally people don't like change, but also people are generally worried for their jobs. You also have IT people who have spent a lot of time, a lot of maybe years, building a server somewhere, invested time and effort to get it running in a particular way. So I think when I started doing cloud migrations, I think well over about 6 years ago now, I remember I was involved in a really large project, and I had all these challenges, and we wasted a lot of time and effort just trying to sort of convince, if you like, the IT department that the cloud was better in doing this or that. And the light should have been obvious, but the light came on. I recall I had a conversation in a pub with one of the IT guys, and he literally said to me, "Yeah, Dimitri, I've been hearing your arguments for a long time now. You're probably right. I think you're right. But I'll be honest with you, I'm just scared that I'll lose my job. I don't know what will happen. None of us know what will happen. And so, yeah, we just, we're just not comfortable. And that's fine." And so, that's just another example of things that do happen. You also get the arguments of, we've always done things this way, etc., etc. And all these sort of arguments go back to, ultimately, it's fear of people not knowing what the future brings for them and their jobs in that company. So with all that said, it's obviously well and good to talk about the problems. The real issue is, what can you do to fix it? So the first thing which people, an organization, a senior leadership needs to do is communicate very clearly with their employees. So by that I mean, once hard decisions have been made, and some hard decisions will have to be made, unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. It's also part of the cost savings of moving into the cloud. As you automate, you have a leaner, perhaps meaner IT organization. Maybe you can still keep the size, but things will have to change, and hard decisions will need to be made. Those decisions aren't and shouldn't be made by the security architect or the solution architect. Those are decisions much higher up at the board level, which whatever the organization's structure is. But those are hard senior leadership decisions. Once those decisions are made, they should then be communicated at all levels in that organization. You have to have a planned communication approach, depending on how large that company or organization is, you might want to consider bringing in professional communication companies to tailor your message the right way. But that message must be constant, it must be regular, and it must be ongoing. And I think a key part of that message, and that should have filtered down to individual, if you like, managers, division leaders, directors, etc. It's that people's minds should be put at rest. Say, okay, your job might change. We're going to train you. You are still valued. You are going to be needed. And you certainly have a part to play in all this. It's really, really important that that message comes through. Otherwise, you will have some serious challenges in getting any cloud migration or digital transformation project over the line. As part of the communication, I think, it sounds like there's a lot of negatives, but there's one really interesting positive that's come out of successful migrations I've been in. And it is around the way of working, certainly within IT. So a very good example is if you take your development team or your whatever team writes, adjusts or manipulates your code in your organization, they definitely add a lot of, I wouldn't say add, there is certainly a lot of value and benefits from going into the cloud, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So I've seen many software development teams and small organizations, large organizations have become really enthused about doing their jobs. They certainly had, I've seen software development teams that had high turnover rates. Suddenly, that turnover rate stopped once they bought into the cloud. I've seen developers come up with tons of ideas. They've obviously improved productivity, etc. And that's not just down to obviously the automation of a CI/CD pipeline, etc. But it is more when you look into it, and we looked into it, and we spoke to these developers, and we spoke to managers and the actual coders themselves. It's okay, what is it that you find so invigorating in this new sort of cloud world? And what they say to you is, it's the speed at which they can actually, if you like, have an idea in their head, put that into a concept and roll it out into development and pre-prod, right? Things which the cloud obviously enables them to do. So where before you had a whole waterfall model and it takes months or weeks to provision a test server, I think we all know the gig, we all know the issues. Suddenly in the cloud, they have an idea, they're certainly enthused, they're certainly working, they can spin up what they want to do much faster, they can put into development and test, and they can collaborate and they can work. And this is actually a huge added value to an organization. So again, I think what I wanted to point out here is not just the three key things to think about as you migrate, but also bear in mind that there are, obviously, aside from the obvious cloud migration, the CapEx to OpEx model, all those things, there's actually an added people value as well. So people actually start to enjoy working, and you get an added productivity boost, which some organizations weren't expecting when they certainly were at the start of their journeys into the cloud. So again, just to recap, I think there are three core things which I wanted to bring out, if nothing else, to the audience today. The three things to consider as we move into the cloud, certainly with the current climate, COVID-19, etc. A lot of us, or most of us, or all of us, almost, are working from home. We are using the cloud a lot more. I think and I predict that ways of working will probably certainly be looked at again and reconsidered, refactored as we go forward. And so cloud transformations will not certainly just remain the same. I think possibly we might be looking at increase once this is all over. And so the three things which I think we all need to bear in mind again is the impact of changes to political climate and organization structure as you move into the cloud. Also two, preparing for necessary changes, organization behavior, the culture, ways of working. And finally, and last but not the least, upskilling and training your staff and employees to be ready as they embark on this journey. So with that, I think that's all I wanted to say today. Obviously, I know we are running a bit behind time, so I've had to shorten my speech or ramble. Oh, I wouldn't call it a ramble, but my speech certainly. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate having you all here. And one more thing I wanted to point out, there is actually a corresponding white paper for this talk, which you all can download and sort of help you to sort of recall and remember the key points, the key learnings, which certainly I've taken and got from my cloud migration experience in the industry. With that, I hand over to Lewis, and thank you very much for listening.
Dimitri, thank you very much. You need to unshare so that I can share, please.
Absolutely.
And thanks everyone again for joining, and to Dimitri for what I thought was a very clear explanation of the issues around spinning up a cloud and getting an organizational acceptance of that cloud. I've certainly got one question I'd like to ask on behalf of the board, but before I do, if anybody else listening has a question they'd like to ask Dimitri, perhaps you could go ahead and ask. Don't forget to unmute, or you can use the chat facility at the bottom of the screen somewhere to send him a chat direct, and Dimitri, feel free to chip in. So just quickly, what we've got today is, as well as Dimitri and myself, I'm the Director of Research for CSA UK. We've got Vladimir, who's Director of Events, Sean, and I'm not sure if Francesco's still on the phone, but Francesco as well.
Yep. So
we're all geared up to ask questions, but let me just ask, has anybody else got a question from the floor, as it were, to ask Dimitri before we go ahead?
I think it's best if we use the chat and Paul have asked a question that we can answer. Okay, so question number one: what steps should organizations take to prepare themselves to move to the cloud, and why? And I think, Dimitri, you've addressed some of that, but you just want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things I didn't mention in my talk was when it comes to steps organizations to prepare, again, take the technical designs or the migration designs, all those technical things aside, which for me personally I think are the easiest bit to fix. It's about considering the impact again on the, if you like, the people aspects of your organization, the politics even. So this is another word, sort of the unspoken word, maybe not the nice word, but politics. So people naturally don't like to lose control. They don't like to lose their spheres of influence. They don't like to have a smaller team. All these issues come into play. Obviously, fear of losing their jobs. And so what should organizations do to prepare for themselves for that? Well, they need to plan. They need to factor that into their thinking, right? So have a conversation with a director of IT and say, you might actually have a smaller team going forward now, less headcount. However, we might increase budget to do this or that. So you need to have those conversations, difficult conversations. You certainly need to communicate to your employees and staff that you will be keeping on, that their jobs are safe and that they will be upskilled. A lot of people are very happy to learn new skills, not only because they keep their jobs, but also it makes themselves more marketable. So communication, planning for the people effect is what, for me, one of the things that gets missed, a key thing that gets missed. It certainly slows down migrations and has a huge impact because people tend to think just of the technical issues and having fun with all these new services, and I certainly am one of them. But if this bit gets missed, then you have a problem.
Yeah, I agree, and I think your point about upskilling is very important. My experience of cloud migrations is very much one that it tends to require a different kind of workforce, not necessarily different people, but a workforce with a different set of skills. And very often those skills need to be not just technical, but communication skills, as in reaching out to outside organizations like Amazon or Google or whoever. And which raises an interesting point that I'd never thought about, that procurement are very used to doing that kind of thing.
Indeed.
And so there's a good, intercept there as well.
Absolutely, Lewis. And again, just going back to, my talk. So the skills and the relationships that procurement have acquired over the years certainly adds a huge amount of value in these sort of situations. Absolutely.
And not just with sorry, mate.
No, I was just saying, not just externally as well, but internally as well. So remember, as you go into the cloud, you suddenly get bills, sometimes very large bills, and you say, how do you allocate to what department, that sort of thing. So that's where the relationships that procurement would have built and developed with various departments actually comes into play. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, I think it's important to understand what your current costs are. So to take your current capex bills, what you were spending, what your replacement costs were. Look at the life cycle, expected sort of life cycle of the equipment, which differs as well it will be very different for network equipment and then sort of active equipment, storage and stuff. So storage probably has the shortest lifespan of anything in a data center, and network equipment probably has the longest, or rather, passive network has the longest, and active network has sort of the second longest. But then there's network associated with storage and stuff like that. So there's lots of nuances, and some of these line items are quite big, and they all have different kind of lifespans. And then you're then trying to optimize, knowing what the equivalent versions of these things are in the cloud and what they cost. And what options there are to replace like for like, and or change your services, refactor your services so they're better suited to the cloud in the first place, which is a very important and far too big for this presentation kind of topic.
Well, that's your next topic of presentation, yeah. Sean. Thanks.
Probably.
Sean, would you just like to introduce yourself quickly?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm DevOps lead at Kraken Digital Asset Exchange.
Thank you.
So yeah, just to expand on that ever so slightly. So then you're trying to optimize for like costs, capex versus opex, and take the people thing into account as well. Where upskilling is actually probably very good value for money compared with hiring new people who have cloud experience as well, and definitely recommended as something to consider before you go out on a hiring spree and find out you need to get rid of people. In terms of costs, but then you're looking at, so when this equipment becomes end of life, that's when you're targeting for this cloud stuff to be coming online optimally. So some of it's going to happen before others, and you can retire stuff quite opportunistically and align licenses and stuff like that as well, because some of your huge costs might be in licensing with VMware and stuff like that. And then you can get those renewals aligned with your cloud kind of maturity, and make that transition line up, and that will make your superiors and your accountants a lot happier.
I completely agree. Thank you. One question for both of you, and actually, since you're both in the technical line, as it were. you know, I think the technical people, sometimes we, you know, the business decisions made, but I actually think the technical people have got a lot to contribute, a lot of positive to contribute. So if you are a technician in an organization that is looking to make this journey, or even is in the journey and maybe is losing its way a bit, how do you, in a constructive way, go back to your IT director, your CIO, whoever, and say, you know, here's my view?
So I'll take, obviously, because I'm obviously a techie and I know, but I think I go back to what I mentioned in my talk. I've had long, detailed presentations and attended architecture review boards and as an enterprise security architect, and done all the slides and the designs and all of those, and I've got absolutely nowhere. In my experience, one of the most successful migrations I was involved in, which I won't name, but it's a large retailer, and they actually basically moved their retail operations online into the cloud literally just before Christmas, which is a huge risk for any retailer, because Christmas is the biggest sort of revenue stream of the year. But long story short, the reason why that worked was because the boss, the big boss, the CIO, he spoke with his team. He was part of the agile Scrum team, if you like, on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that's what needs to be done going forward, by the way. But what he did do, he made it very clear to the existing organization that A, you're keeping your job, but B, this is how we're going to do it, right? This is going to be done regardless. And C, here's the designs. So if there's something here you don't like or you think needs to be changed, feel free, you guys, to find solutions, ways around. But this is the direction of travel. So this is what it's going to be.
So he listened to his team and based his decisions accordingly.
Oh, absolutely. But I think the key point was he said, we are going into the cloud. So you can you either get with a memo or you can leave, right? Yeah. So I don't want to hear about ifs, buts, maybes. Find solutions, because we are going into the cloud. That's it.
Okay.
I guess for me, it's understanding the value add of the cloud, which is when people start talking about DR, BC, resilience, scaling, saying, look, our current steady state is this, but if we want to be more resilient, we need a DR site, which is going to cost this. For business continuity purposes, we need to make sure it's in more than one location, etc., etc. We've got backups to consider. The things that you're not currently spending money on, but you should be. How many of those can you get from a cloud for free? And say, well, okay, we're no longer comparing apples with apples here. You're getting the DR, the BC, resilience, and the scaling of the like completely on tap kind of infrastructure for free, and you don't get that from your data center. You might get it from the hybrid approach, but I think that's another. Hybrid is definitely another talk for another day.
Yeah, that's the next talk we've got you lined up for.
Going down that route at the moment, which is interesting.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question then. So how do organizations decide what type of workloads are suitable for which type of cloud services, whether it's infrastructure, platform, software, and there's loads of others now, of course. So how do we make that decision?
So that sort of ties into some dovetails some stuff Sean has been talking about, but certainly from a very, very high level, it's a really good question, but it depends on the organization itself. There's no one size fits all answer to this question, because various organizations have different technology estates. They have different technology supporting core business processes, etc. And it really depends on historical architecture. It depends on the strategy of the organization moving forward, how they want to do. It also depends on things like regulatory and compliance requirements. So, for example, in banking, they might have issues with things like encryption. They don't want to, or maybe don't trust, the cloud vendor to issue or manage their keys. So that has an impact on whether you're going to use PaaS or SaaS or IaaS. So it's not an easy question to answer. I think from a very high level, the reasons why you use as PaaS and SaaS are obvious. However, how you decide or allocate the proportion will depend on the organization.
So it really depends on a deep business understanding.
Not just the business, but technology. So there's a lot of technology. There's a reliance on what your existing estate looks like. So, for example, if you currently using Cloud Foundry or VMware, and Sean alluded to your issue of licensing. If you've already paid for those licenses, then does it make sense for you to go IaaS? Maybe not. So then you say, okay, maybe we'll just go PaaS or SaaS for some of our applications. So it's a technology issue, but it's not an easy question to just look at because it depends on the organization itself.
Yeah, I see there's lots of questions popping up on the chat room there, by the way. So, if anybody wants to chip in, or Dimitri, maybe take a look and see if there's anything you want to address there. And let me just go to the last question we got raised here, I think. How can you get organizations into the transformation mindset needed? And again, I think you've touched on this, but any further thoughts as we go through?
No, I think, without sort of repeating what I've said, I think the mindset, it's all about communication. It's about clear communication from the leadership. Once a decision is made, that decision has to stand. People need to understand that it stands. And really the conversations should be driven about how best we would implement or use the cloud technology, because that's the direction of travel. And for me, once that is clear, people come up with a lot of innovative, brilliant ideas about how to use the cloud. So once you set you set the bar, the direction of travel, no one can, that's it. That's the memo. Go with the memo. You then start from there and move forward.
Okay. As I
So
say,
if I can chip in, if I can chip in as Francesco here. I think in a lot of transformation that I've seen, IaaS is infrastructure as a service, or lift and shift. So take these servers and lift into the cloud. It's probably the most natural migration path, because as Dimitri said, teams are used to run server in a certain way, and lifting and shifting them in a specific way is probably the easiest and smoother approach. Architecture don't get drastically changed, and then while maturity of the team get higher and higher, then they can start choosing cloud native service and then move maybe towards more of a platform as a service, or even software as a service. So things like running piece of code directly into service like Lambda and things like that, and start using storage in a different way, different type of storage. But it's all a matter of maturity of the team and getting them comfortably using the service in a clever way, and also giving the chance to them to come up with new things. So one advantage of using the cloud, for example, that I've seen, is giving the developers a very nice and interesting environment where they go and can experiment to actually improve their life. So every day is live, every day experimenting, or how to run piece of code, how to run specific service, because we have very intelligent people in an organization, and I think with cloud transformation, some of them get left behind and not used to, not used as part of the transformation. While the most successful transformation that I've seen is involving all the part of the organization. Like Dimitri was saying, it's like procurement. What Sean was saying is like part of development, because they can come up with their own version and idea.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Any other comments?
And I think Paul was challenging on lift and shifting as if I take just the perimeter issue and problem, yes, it is the old idea, and sometimes it can also fail because threats to a cloud environment are very, very, very different from an on-prem environment, and you don't get the same level of feeling and the same kind of security control that you have on-prem, or if you do, they tend to be clunked in. The old traditional firewall clunked in inside as a front end to the cloud doesn't enable a lot of cloud transformation service. And also, for example, you don't see a lot of management traffic in the cloud. So if you try to do if you try to force antiquated pattern into the cloud, not only are you making the cloud less secure, but even more complicated, and you introduce friction. So yes, IaaS, lift and shift is probably the more traditional approach, but should be taken with a pinch of salt.
Yeah,
so use the cloud as cloud.
Do you think as organizations mature and as companies mature, or knowledge, the understanding of cloud matures, that people will start to take different approaches then, as opposed to just the lift and shift approach?
Yeah, I think we will, as Cloud Security Alliance, we will keep on sharing the knowledge of patterns and cloud natives and ideas on how to migrate in this new environment. That is not new anymore. I mean, we've been on cloud journey for past almost 10 years now. So cloud is not that new anymore. Yeah. But there is still resistance on migrating with full cloud native, or getting rid of that firewall and putting, for example, segmentation, virtual private cloud, segmenting network in a different way, and using cloud native service like cloud firewall or endpoint firewalls, because those are, if you want, as Dimitri was saying, it involves change in mindset, change in behavior, and it involves also people upskilling, and not everybody wants to do so.
Yeah, and if I can add on to Francesco, completely agree with you. I think certainly in my experience, and not in all cases, but in a lot of the time, the reason why there's a lift and shift mentality, certainly when it comes to security architecture, but also solutions architecture, to be fair, is because a lot of times you have people who are traditional IT people, perhaps not very skilled sometimes in the cloud, don't understand how the cloud works, software-defined networking, or what services are in the cloud. So again, going back to the upskilling and training aspects of this, is that once people understand, or you train your people, make them qualified cloud architects, they very quickly understand that the old models, your perimeterization and all that doesn't work in the cloud. You can actually do it a lot easier, a lot more effectively, more efficiently by using cloud services and principles. And so in my case, I think the short answer is skills. A lot of people perhaps don't quite understand how cloud works.
Thank you. I'm conscious we've hit the top of the hour. In fact, we've run over the top of the hour. So those of you that are still with us, thank you. I have one other question I'd like to ask, but just quickly for the panel, if you're there, can you actually deliver a successful cloud migration in a traditional IT organization? Is digital or agile or both a prerequisite for this?
So I'll pitch in. Vladimir here. So.
Thank you, Vlad.
It's interesting to see traditional IT organization, what it actually is. If you look at the history, and I still remember, 20, 25, 30 years ago, when computers were really, really starting, and all the business processes were using paper. The digitization at that time was seen as a godsend, but also some people in the organizations didn't like it, because, as Dimitri said, it was a change. It threatened their jobs. I think cloud is kind of the same, and it has been for the last 10 years. So, in the traditional IT organizations, what really needs to change is the education of what cloud is first, and Cloud Security Alliance has a great resources about the guidance. Currently in version 4, I believe. and what are the kind of design patterns where cloud services, and there are different models, could be used, and where it perhaps doesn't make sense. But also, the traditional RT organization I've seen over 3 years could be a IT manager who thinks that he knows better or she knows better, and the business managers are there to kind of be not at his service, but just use his services, and they should not be really telling him, how to do IT and what needs to be delivered. And that mindset is not going to change from within the traditional IT organization. It has to change from the above. It has to be driven by the business leaders and business managers.
100% agree with that. 100%.
Vladimir, I hadn't realised you were that old. You wouldn't care to you wouldn't care to introduce yourself, would you? Just quickly.
Oh yes. So I'm a security IT professional. How long? Probably 25 years in the business of some sort of between IT, security, currently running security consultancy and helping CSA with their activities.
I think just to wrap it up, the number of questions, I don't think any organization nowadays can avoid digital transformation, and either you do it or you're forced to do it. And we see with the COVID-19 that a lot of organizations were forced to do remote, to test their BCP, their receiving plan, not rely on their on-prem environment because maybe there are not enough people to maintain. So either the world is going to push you towards it and you jump on board it, or not. And also maybe just a more softer approach is consider which part of your organization are logically or can logically move to the cloud, and what other are more logically staying inside in term on-prem in terms of regulation, or in terms of, well, maybe it's not very cost effective, maybe changing the architecture would take too much time. So always be rational and consider service by service in a move to the cloud. But as an overall, digital and digital transformation are necessarily, regardless of the size of the organization or the environment where you operate.
Thanks. Just lastly, a quickie from me, because we're in the middle of this current pandemic or whatever, but there was a discussion going on recently about the difference between disaster recovery and business continuity. And, do we have a model set up for business continuity given where we find ourselves? Any quick input from the board on that?
Yeah, probably. Disaster recovery, you're probably talking about recovery point, recovery time objectives for data or systems. Business continuity, you're probably more concerned about people and processes.
Okay.
Generally speaking, depends what sort of business though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So just to wrap it all up now, thank you to the panel, and especially to Dimitri, Sean, Vladimir, and Francesco for their contributions here today. To Runli, who has been organizing it all behind the scenes. Just to remind you that we're here for you, delivering mentoring, research, events, networking, and you can find our Twitter handle and our LinkedIn group listed below. And the last point here is around Cybersecurity Awards 2020. You need to get your submission in by the 10th of May, and the ceremony is the 4th of July. I should bring fireworks, of course, and all things being equal, of course, at the moment. And this is where you can log your vote. So I don't know if anybody on the board has anything more to add to the discussion, or whether I should wrap it up at this point.
Maybe just to mention that this award probably is going to go digital, and you should be putting your submission and your candidate. So if you feel yourself as a candidate for as an influencer, or somebody can add some contribution, don't try out to put forward your name. and you can self-candidate yourself. We're going to put forward some names as well, but don't shy out, and please feel free to candidate yourself and vote. And our vote, the judge will definitely have the last say in who this person or the person of the year will be. But please feel free to put yourself forward, put yourself out there.
Look forward to seeing some of those nominations then. Thanks, Francesco. So thanks again, Dimitri, Sean, Vladimir, Run Lee, Lee, if you're still on, and the other members of the board. Ben, I think you're out there as well. I hope you're feeling a little bit better, Ben, and able to follow the conversation. You were certainly active on the chat room. So thanks, everyone, and speak to you again soon. Don't forget, this is going to be up on our website as a recording with all the comments and notes going along with it. Take care, everybody, and do avoid that nasty bug that's going around at the moment.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Use the
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stay safe,
Bye.
guys.